The year 2023 was a landmark year with several key issues being heard or decided by Indian courts. So here's a look back at the biggest news stories out of Court Corner. Arguably, one of the biggest cases was the landmark ruling by a 5-judge bench in the Article 370 case. A case that probably has more political repercussions than legal. The Supreme Court upheld the abrogation of Article 370. The Supreme Court held that J&K enjoys no sovereignty and that the Indian Constitution is applicable fully. The Supreme Court also hoped that statehood should be restored soon and that elections would be conducted before September 30th, 2024. Number 2, here's another high-voltage case, the same-sex marriage matter. It was again a ruling by a 5-judge bench. The Supreme Court gave a big no to same-sex marriages and to the fundamental right to marry. The Supreme Court also held that it's not the court's job to grant the right to marry to same-sex partners and that issue should be left to the government. Review petitions, meanwhile, have already been filed. Number 3, here's another case with big political implications, especially ahead of the 2024 elections. In March, the Supreme Court held that election commissioners had to be appointed by a panel of Prime Minister, Leader of Opposition and the Chief Justice of India. In August, the centre introduced a new law that replaced the CJI with a cabinet minister. Now, even as the parliament granted its nod, former Supreme Court Judge Rohinton Nariman claimed that this will hurt the Election Commission's independence and that free and fair elections will soon become a chimera. Number 4, Supreme Court also saw multiple rounds of legal contests between the Delhi and central government over administrative control over the national capital. In May, the Supreme Court cited the federal structure and granted Delhi government control over administrative services. Now, much like in the case of the Election Commission appointments, the centre again came out with a new law after the Supreme Court ruling and gave the Delhi LG the powers of administration. Number 5. This was the biggest corporate case of the year, the Adani Hindenburg saga. In March, the Supreme Court directed for a SEBI probe and asked an expert panel to review the regulatory framework in place. Now, in June, the expert committee came out and said that there was no regulatory failure and there was no evidence against Adani. In August, SEBI informed the top court that probe was completed in 22 out of 24 cases. In November, the Supreme Court reserved its judgment while observing that there was no reason to doubt SEBI's investigation. Number 6, the Supreme Court also heard pleas challenging electoral bonds. Petitioners claimed that bonds were opaque and where only the government knew the donors. The centre submitted that voters can't have an overbroad right to know and that the Supreme Court reserved its judgment after that while flagging selective confidentiality of this scheme. And finally, number 7, this was not so much a case but rather an issue, a sensitive issue at that. Now, keep in mind, in 2018, 4 sitting Supreme Court judges held a press conference against the then CJI, Deepak Mishra. The judges had flagged allocation of cases, of especially sensitive cases, to specific judges. Now, cut to 2023 and similar concerns were shared by senior advocate Dushyant Dave in a letter to the CJI. Reports have cited how the case on judicial appointments was taken away from Justice Kaul and how some politically sensitive matters were listed for hearing before Justice Bela Trivedi. Now, with the Supreme Court scheduled to hear the CAA case as well as the review of the same-sex judgment matter and also likely to deliver its judgment in the Adani Hindenburg case as well as the electoral bonds case, 2024 is already looking like a busy year for the top court.